The Gundam franchise is arguably one of the most beloved in anime history. While it didn't necessarily invent the mecha genre, it certainly revolutionized it and brought it into a spotlight it has not yet left. Not only has it influenced other anime series like Neon Genesis Evangelion and Code Geass, but it has also inspired movies, TV shows, other manga, and of course, video games, including Gundam Breaker 4. Many other companies have experimented with the fantasy born from the Gundam series, that being the ability for people to create their own mechas and use them to fight enemies across varying locales. One such example is From Software's recent title, Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon, which released to critical acclaim. However, it's not the only recent example as of late. Bandai Namco has released a new entry in their ongoing Gundam Breaker series, Gundam Breaker 4. One of the Gundam franchise's many video game spin-offs, the last entry in the Gundam Breaker series released in 2016. After 8 years though, the franchise has finally returned. How has it made its jump to the next generation of systems? Is it the perfect experience for longtime Gundam fans as well as newcomers? I've had the chance to review Gundam Breaker 4, and after 12 hours of playing, I can confidently say that while the game's premise and customization mechanics are charming, the gameplay and story came up short for me. In Gundam Breaker 4, you are one of the few beta testers invited to the Gunpla Battle Blaze Beyond Borders game, also known as GB4. In this fictional game, you can create a Gunpla and use it in competitive online battles against other players. When you enter the world of GB4, you are immediately greeted by Tao and Lin, two other players who each have their own personalities and characteristics. Tao is a knowledgeable player who knows everything about GB4, yet is ultimately meek and shy in the face of hardship when we first meet him. Lin, on the other hand, is an overconfident hothead who dreams of becoming the best player in GB4. As you begin to build a clan, you meet other characters, the troubled Sheena, the soft-spoken Lilin, and more. Each of the characters I just mentioned is somewhat compelling. On one hand, Gundam Breaker 4's cast of characters are fairly cliched and trope-heavy. Watch any modern anime and you'll find characters identical to Tao, Lin, Sheena, and so on. It made a lot of later story surprises feel less impactful as I could predict them hours beforehand. On the other hand though, each character is charming and unique in their own ways. Plus, they're not limited to their tropes, and a few of them, namely Sheena and one other character introduced in Chapter 3, go on a character arc that was impactful in spite of everything else. That's the key word in Gundam Breaker 4, charming. There were a few decisions that I found admittedly strange at first. For example, I didn't understand the decision to set Breaker 4 in a fictional MMO rather than one of the many timelines that exist within the Gundam universe. To me, it felt like a missed opportunity to not create a Gundam to fight in the Universal Century, Cosmic Era, and other such timelines. That said, I very quickly realized that the whole point of Gundam Breaker 4 was not to have players explore the playground that is the Gundam franchise, but to navigate a very specific part of that playground, Gunpla building. Customization is the name of the game, and that's reflected in the story. Characters won't talk about winning a war or fighting in a battle against a daring Gundam pilot. They'll talk about optimizing their Gunpla for battle, as well as people who hack the game to cheat and create a Gunpla that is overpowered. With Gundam Breaker 4 talking so much about creating the perfect Gunpla, its customization options have to be good then, right? Well, I am delighted to say that the game's customization is easily the best part of the game. Much like previous Gundam Breaker games, as well as similar titles like Armored Core 6, you're going to spend the majority of your playtime building your ideal mech. As such, the customization system cannot be boring. If it is, then all enjoyment immediately goes out the window. Thankfully, GB4's Gunpla building options are robust and incredibly addicting. Let's start with the obvious. After every mission, you get access to a wide variety of different head pieces, arm pieces, leg pieces, chest pieces, weapons, and more. You unlock these based on how well you do in battle, namely whether or not you get an S rank or how well you can tear apart other Gunpla. You can also buy some kits in the lobby using the currency you've earned. Before you start your next mission, you can play around with customizing your very own Gunpla using the parts you've acquired. Gundam Breaker 4's customization options are very easy to understand, thankfully. It's divided into head, body, right arm, legs, backpack, right close range weapon, and left close range weapon. Each part can change the appearance of your Gunpla in drastic ways. My Gunpla looked completely different at the start of the game versus at the end of the game, and I was all too happy to continue fiddling so I can create my ideal mecha. Most of their parts will increase your HP, reaction speed, and thruster capacity, allowing you to take more hits and move around the battlefield quicker. However, changing your headpiece or arms won't drastically change how you play GB4. The major adjustments will come from the weapons you pick. There are a lot of weapons, such as bazookas, machine guns, laser weapons, buster swords, whips, laser swords, axes, and more. Which weapon you pick will depend on your playstyle. Unfortunately though, the There is still little importance in choosing one weapon or the other, since an axe, a sword, and a whip are all equally effective against other gunpla. In terms of the main customization, the actual designs you can create are strong and add a lot of depth to the game. Later, you can unlock builder parts that allow you to add other unique elements to your mech. For instance, I discovered I can add a cape and horns to my gunpla. There are other great options too. There's obviously a photo mode to play around with, but for true diehard fans, there's a new diorama mode. The diorama mode allows players to create their own scenarios by posting gunpla, adding props, and even explosions. I didn't spend too much time messing around with the diorama mode, but it was a satisfying option to go back to once I beat the game. While the customization options are great, there are some very clear limitations. I already mentioned how meaningless it feels to change parts beyond just adjusting your stats. Also, parts often clip into each other. For example, the shield would often clip into the arms, or in my case, the cape physics were all wrong and would end up in the wrong places. Whether or not that's intentional is hard to say, but I don't feel like I'm building an actual gunpla when my cape can barely be seen since the back parts are clipping through them. It all feels messy and dated, bringing me to the most flawed part of Gundam Breaker 4, which became abundantly clear during my time with the game: its gameplay. Bandai Namco has not released a Gundam Breaker game since 2016. You can feel that in this game's design. The combat loop is simple. When you select a mission, you are paired with either 1 or 2 AI allies. You must fight through 3 waves of enemies, each with a different objective. Sometimes those objectives are guarding a ship before it launches, sometimes it's killing a select amount of Gundam, and sometimes it's killing every single Gundam you see. In rare circumstances, the objective of the first wave will vary from the second wave, but usually, the 2 waves will have the exact same goals. The third wave is always a boss fight. Once you've played through a few missions, you have already experienced the majority of the mission types within Gundam Breaker 4. Therein lies the problem. The combat loop is way too simple. Every mission feels precisely the same. You deal with enemies the same way, you move around the battlefield the same way, even the Gundam you fight often looks the same. And so too do the locations you navigate around. They will often fall into several tropes, such as a lava area, a snowy area, a cavern, a factory, and so on. There are very few battlefields that don't repeat, and when you've played enough levels, you will not be able to tell one mission from another. There's also no sense of mass and scale in the locations. Each battlefield is sized to the scale of your mobile suit, which removes a lot of the fun from the mecha genre. This monotony isn't helped by the actual moment-to-moment gameplay. Oftentimes, Gundam Breaker 4's enemy AI feels like it's flipping a coin between being absurdly challenging to fight and hilariously easy. There were a few times where I would be caught in an infinite combo by an enemy mobile weapon that would last for over 15 seconds. In these moments, I would be forced to put down my controller until the enemy decided to drop the combo. At other points, the enemy mobile weapon would just be flying away from me at all times without attacking at all. Instead of feeling like a thrilling game of cat and mouse, fighting mobile weapons felt like an elaborate game of tag where I'd have to reach the enemy mobile weapon after chasing them around the small map for minutes at a time. There would be just as many times where the enemy mobile weapon would stop right in front of me and simply stand there for a few moments, not doing anything. Further, if you use the Buster Sword or other highly damaging weapons, you can destroy enemies within seconds, trivializing combat and customization. That AI issue also applies to your allies. Every time I would down an enemy, I would expect to see my ally dealing just as much damage to them. In reality, they would be in another corner of the map, spinning around in a circle and slashing in air. In spite of this, I never got anything other than an S rank in all 35 missions. Additionally, I didn't die a single time, and I was only down twice in the entire game. The final boss only took me 4 minutes to complete. As I watched the end credits, I didn't feel accomplished or satisfied. I just felt disappointed. The entire game just felt so monotonous that it didn't matter how good the music was, how great the characters were, and so on. And if that wasn't enough, there are several bugs that I noticed throughout the game. I noticed that the on-screen gunpla models were completely missing in a few key story moments. There was several frame drops, especially towards the end. The lock-on would often not work, and missiles would miss enemies at point-blank range. Finally, I noticed that the damage would simply not register when I attempted to attack an enemy. It didn't look like invincibility frames since there was no visual indicator, but it was impossible to tell. At several points throughout this review, I've noted how Gundam Breaker 4 is a game filled with idiosyncrasies. Its story is cliched, its customization is great but limited, and its gameplay is a mess. Yet despite its problems, I can't help but admire what this game will likely represent for its core audience, people who love Gundam and building gunpla. While that's a very niche audience, it does a lot to bring them in. There's a new diorama mode, the many gunpla kits you can use from countless anime entries in the series, and even the ability to create a gunpla that you could feasibly build in real life. These mechanics cannot be overlooked, and if you're a Gundam fan, a gunpla fan, or a Gundam Breaker fan, Gundam Breaker 4 will likely appeal to you. That being said, I can't imagine how the gameplay or story would be appealing to those very same fans. With how monotonous it feels, it's best to experience Gundam Breaker 4 in bite-sized increments. As I was booted back to the menu, I felt no inclination or desire to explore the other modes or multiplayer options since I had just spent the last 12 hours doing the same thing repeatedly without any sense of variation or accomplishment. In spite of my admiration of everything Gundam Breaker 4 represents, I can't recommend the complete package, even for the most die-hard fans of Gundam. Final Weapon is giving Gundam Breaker 4 a 2 out of 5. Bandai Namco provided Final Weapon with a PlayStation 5 copy of Gundam Breaker 4 for review purposes.